Using less electricity does not always mean your power bill will drop as much as you expect. And that gap between effort and result is exactly why so many households become frustrated with their energy costs. The logic seems simple. Turn off more lights, raise or lower the thermostat less aggressively, unplug devices that are not being used, run appliances less often, pay closer attention to every switch and every outlet, then wait for the next utility bill and expect to see a meaningful difference. Sometimes the bill does go down, but sometimes the change feels surprisingly small. That is where the confusion starts. You remember using less electricity, you remember being more careful. Maybe the house even felt less comfortable because you were trying to conserve energy. Yet the bill still arrives looking higher than you expected. The first reaction is often to assume you did not conserve enough. So you try harder. You leave more lights off. You become stricter about heating and cooling. You delay using certain appliances. You remind everyone in the house to unplug chargers and turn things off. The effort increases, but the results can still feel disproportionate. At some point, the question changes from, how can I use less electricity, to, why does using less electricity not seem to change the bill very much? That is a much more useful question, because a power bill is not simply a visual report of how careful you were during the month. It represents your relationship with an electrical system that continues supplying the energy your home still needs. Even after aggressive conservation, certain loads remain. The refrigerator still cycles throughout the day. Phones still need charging. The Wi-Fi router continues running. Lighting is still needed after dark. Heating or cooling may still be necessary depending on the weather. Cooking, laundry, and other household tasks do not disappear just because you are trying to conserve. This is the first structural layer people often miss. You can reduce optional electricity use without eliminating essential electricity use. And essential loads can represent a meaningful portion of what the household depends on every day. But there is another distinction that matters even more. Reducing consumption and reducing dependence are not exactly the same thing. A household may consume less electricity while remaining completely dependent on the utility for every unit of electricity it still uses. That means the home may become more efficient without becoming more independent. The real issue isn't simply how much electricity you stop using, it's where the electricity you still need comes from. That difference changes the way energy savings should be understood. Imagine a household cuts unnecessary electricity use significantly. That is useful. There is less demand, less energy is being consumed, but the refrigerator, lights, communication equipment, and other essential devices are still being powered by the same grid connection. If the household wants to reduce how much electricity it purchases from that grid, conserving power is one approach. Another approach is supplying some of the required electricity from a different legitimate energy source. That is where alternative home energy systems enter the discussion. But this is also where marketing language can create confusion. A battery, for example, does not automatically reduce grid dependence just because it can power appliances. The electricity stored inside the battery had to come from somewhere. If the battery was charged entirely from the utility grid and later used to power household devices, the system has mostly changed when that electricity is being used. It has not created a new source of energy. There can also be energy losses during charging, storage, and conversion. So the mechanism matters. A system capable of capturing energy from another source could potentially supply electricity that would otherwise have been drawn from the grid. Solar generation is an obvious example of this principle, but regardless of the technology, the question should always remain the same. Where is the usable energy actually coming from? That question is more important than the size of the device, the appearance of the system, or the percentage printed in a marketing claim, because no energy system gets around the basic relationship between source, output, capacity, and demand. A small home energy system may support selected electrical loads. It may help provide backup electricity during an outage. Depending on how it obtains energy, it may also reduce the amount of electricity a household needs to draw from the utility, but those are different functions. Backup power is about availability when normal service disappears. Energy storage is about keeping energy available for later use. Independent generation is about obtaining energy from somewhere other than the grid. Those ideas are related, but they should not be treated as interchangeable. This is why someone trying to lower a power bill can benefit from looking beyond individual habits. The habits still matter. Turning off unnecessary lights prevents unnecessary consumption. Using appliances efficiently makes sense. Avoiding waste is reasonable. But if the household has already removed much of the obvious waste, additional sacrifices may produce smaller and smaller improvements. At that stage, understanding the structure becomes more useful than simply trying harder. Think of household electricity like water flowing into a tank. You can close several unnecessary faucets and reduce how quickly the tank empties. But if the water you still need continues coming from the same supplier, you have reduced usage without changing the source. If your goal is lower dependence on that supplier, the source becomes part of the discussion. Electricity works differently from water, but the analogy helps separate consumption from supply, and that distinction matters beyond monthly costs. A household that depends completely on the grid also depends on the grid remaining available. During a blackout, lower normal consumption does not keep the refrigerator running. It does not charge the phone. It does not restore lighting. Conservation can make a backup energy supply last longer, but conservation by itself does not create backup electricity. This connects the financial problem with the reliability problem. Families may begin researching alternative power because the bill feels too high. Then they realize the same system could also leave them without electricity during an outage. The deeper desire may not be simply to spend less. It may be to gain more control over where household electricity comes from and what remains powered when conditions change. That does not require assuming every home should disconnect from the grid. For many households, complete independence would be unnecessary or impractical. A smaller objective may be more realistic. Reduce unnecessary consumption. Understand which devices are essential. Know how much power those devices require. Then evaluate whether another source of electricity could support part of that demand. That perspective is much more grounded than expecting one small device to erase an entire power bill. It also makes energy claims easier to evaluate. If someone says a system can lower grid consumption, ask what energy source allows it to do that. If it can provide backup power, ask how much output it has and how long it can operate. If it is described as compact, ask what appliances it can realistically support. Clear mechanisms matter more than dramatic promises. Using less electricity is still valuable. But when lower consumption does not produce the financial change you expected, the next step is not always to sacrifice more comfort. Sometimes the more useful step is understanding the difference between energy use, energy supply, and grid dependence. There is a practical guide in the description for anyone who wants a more structured breakdown of home energy alternatives. Subscribe for more clear explanations about electricity costs, backup power, and household energy systems. Lower usage can help, but understanding where your remaining electricity comes from changes the conversation.